Hello, this is a guide to the British parliamentary format of debating. This is the most standard format practiced throughout the world. And the nice thing about that is that, one, we all have the opportunity to come together and practice the same format and then compete in that format in the World Universities Debating Championship, or WUDC, which is the World Championship of Debating. And since we have a largely standardized way of practicing this form of debating, this also means that we can come together, look at the rules, change the rules as needed, and convene about how to possibly make this game fairer. And I'd highly recommend you check out, I think as I've mentioned in other videos, the World's Manual created for Korea Worlds 2021 by the Adjudication Corps, which lists out in depth the different rules of debating and how to debate fairly, how to interpret different motions, etc. The second is that it's also used in many major tournaments. So I am an Asian debater, and therefore I can compete in the Asian British Parliamentary Championship, or ABP, which is the British Parliamentary Championship within all of Asia, or all of the schools within Asia. And many different continents and circuits will have their own version of a major tournament that uses BP as well. And some standards might differ. I will mention if there's any variation in rules in different circuits, but most of them will stick to the rules discussed in this video. Now, while this is the most standard format, I would make the argument that it is the most confusing format, and it's kind of tricky to wrap your head around how this format works. The nice thing about that is that once you have this format down, you will find it a lot easier to debate other formats. So the next video will be about 3 versus 3 debating, which in my opinion is a lot simpler, a lot easier to understand in comparison to BP. But let's start with this. I think it's fairly intuitive to know that there are two sides to any debate. You have the side that is for the motion, or the government side, and you have the side that is against the motion, or the opposition side. Now, the tricky thing is when you further divide these two teams into the opening government and the closing government, and then the opening opposition and the closing opposition. Now, I will show you the particular speaking order later on, but the important thing to note here is that the closing teams speak after the opening teams. So the opening teams will take turns. One speaker from opening government will speak, then from opening opposition, then the second speaker from opening government, and then the second speaker from opening opposition. And it is only when these two teams are done that the closing government's first speaker will come in, and then the closing opposition's first speaker will come in. And then the second speaker from closing government, and then the last speaker from closing opposition. Now, the question is, if you're going to have the initial debate between the opening teams, what does the closing side of the debate do? So, the closing team must agree with the stance of their opening. So they will support or oppose the motion, provided that the opening team has given a debatable, fair stance. In an overwhelming majority of cases, they hopefully will. But the key thing to note about this is that they have to bring forth new material, an extension. And I say new material here rather than a new argument, because I think material can be anything. At closing, you can give an entirely new argument, you can give some new information, you can give new angles and contexts to the debate, and this material can beat the opening team if it is proven to be more valuable. And note here that just being new is not enough. You have to be valuable to the debate. Your argument has to be more important to the debate. So, for example, let's say you have the motion, this House should ban televised executions. Opening government can say that it desensitizes the public to death when they are exposed to televised executions over and over and over again. Now, closing government can say that this is possibly demeaning and dehumanizing to the criminal and their families. Note here that these are both in support of a ban because televised executions do some kind of harm, whether to the public, like an opening government, or to the the private criminal and their families. there is some harm that exists as a consequence of televised executions, and therefore they should ban it. So, in essence, they agree. They are for the ban. However, the way that they differ is their reasoning and justification for the ban. Now, note, these are a couple of rather misconceptions that a lot of new debaters run into. The first is that your opening and closing teams are not teammates. All teams are adversarial. All of them are fighting on their own and they want to win the debate regardless of how the other team is going to do. And so you do not need to work with them. You should not work with them. In fact, that's against the rules. And you should focus on your own material. So, for example, if I am the closing team and I make the argument that this is dehumanizing to a criminal and their family, what I could do is not disagree with opening government and say that it desensitizes the public to death, but I could just limit the importance of this. I could say, while I agree that this could potentially desensitize the public, this is just one of many different things that could desensitize the public. We have movies, different forms of media that all the time expose the public to death, expose the public to this kind of experience over and over again, maybe even more pervasively. And therefore, in either world, the public will be mostly desensitized to death anyway. And because of that, the more important thing to consider is what is the effect to the criminal and their families. And given this then, the closing government argument is more important than the opening government argument. And so you are fighting for yourself in a debate. You do not need to work with any other team. The second thing is that any decision can occur. The team in opening government can take first, and the team in closing government can take second. But it's also possible that the team in opening government takes first, while the team in closing government is fourth or is last. So here's a sample ranking of a debate. You will rank all the teams from first to fourth, and there is a corresponding point equivalent. So if you get first, you'll get 3 points. A second is 2 points, a third is 1 point, and the fourth is 0 points. And these points are important because in a tournament, you'll often have to tally those points, and your number of points will often be the basis of who are you going to go against, will you make it to the elimination stage of the tournament. And there are a few more important rules to note about BP debating. The first is that you have a provided motion or topic, and this provided motion or topic will be given to you 15 minutes in advance of the debate. And so people are always surprised that you have such limited preparation time. And when you're starting out, I think that's one of the hardest things, coming up with a speech with such limited preparation time. And I note that there's a provided motion or topic because in other formats, you often be given multiple motions or topics, or even be allowed to set the motion or topic yourself. In BP, there is a provided motion or topic, and there is no other topic that you will be discussing. The second thing is that there is a panel of judges consisting of at least one judge with as many as up to, I've seen, 9-person panels and a designated chair. This chair will often manage the discussion that will determine who wins the debate, and at the same time explain to all the teams why the decision or the ranking that they gave was that way. The third thing is, again, 15 minutes of preparation time and a 7-minute speaking time. I've seen other formats where they've had less speaking time, but for BP, I'd say in an overwhelming amount of the debate tournaments I've been to, they practice 7-minute speeches. You're not allowed to do online research in BP debating, and there are 2 members per team. I'll get into the particular speakers later. The last thing as well is that there are points of information or substantive interjections into the debate that I will be talking about later. So now that we've talked about the teams, let's talk about the speakers. So like I've mentioned, there are 4 teams and 2 speakers each. In opening government, you have the Prime Minister and the Deputy Prime Minister. In opening opposition, you have the Leader of the Opposition and the Deputy Leader of the Opposition. In closing government, you have the member for the government and the government whip. And in closing opposition, you have the member for the opposition and opposition whip. You'll note that in the left side of each team, I have the speaking order. So it's Prime Minister first, then Leader of the Opposition, then Deputy Prime Minister, then Deputy Leader of the Opposition, then the Member for the Government, Member of the Opposition, Government Whip, and Opposition Whip. These are all terms that I think are difficult to wrap your head around initially, so I'm going to go over just what is expected of you at each speaker position. Because it's not just about the order in which you speak, but what is your role in the debate. So Prime Minister, at the start of the speech, you have to set up the debate. So you have to ask questions like, where does the debate happen? What is the status quo? Who does the debate affect? And basically bringing everyone into a common ground of what are we debating about and why is this an important topic to debate about to begin with. The second thing is that if this is a policy motion, as has been discussed in the motion types video. So for example, if you have this house would, you would need to give a proposal. And exactly how would you carry out this proposal? So for example, in the motion, this house would ban guns. A ban is not necessarily as simple as it sounds because you'd have to explain what exactly is going to happen as a consequence of a ban. Does that mean that if we find out someone has a gun, we will put them in jail? Does that mean that we will prevent establishments from being able to sell guns? Does that mean that there's so many other criminal punishments, other kinds of levies and fines, other state methods that you can use to ban something. And this is important because when you set up, that's also how you prove that the policy is going to work. Because if you don't have a detailed setup, if you have a setup that doesn't sound compelling, the opposition team can just say, yes, the government team can do all these things, but it doesn't mean that it's going to be successful, and that's why it's not a good policy to do. So you have to be very specific and detailed with how the ban will work, and also make a policy that is going to be advantageous to your side. The last thing, and of course, as with most speakers, you have to give a defense of the motion, or in other words, you have to argue for your side of the motion. I realize as well, the policy is important to set up at Prime Minister because there is very, very limited ability for other speakers to do the policy. They can maybe clarify things at best, but they cannot be detailed. They cannot add new things to a significant degree at least. And therefore, at Prime Minister, there is a big expectation for you to explain what is your side defending? What do you want to do in this debate? Now, you also have the Leader of the Opposition, where you have a clash, or the stance from opening opposition, meaning you need not disagree with everything Prime Minister said. Let's go back to this motion, this house would ban guns. Maybe Prime Minister gives a context where guns are a significant problem, shootings are a significant problem, and we regret them, we don't like them. Leader of the Opposition does not have to say guns in all instances are a positive thing. Everyone should have a gun. No, you just have to disagree with a ban. So what that entails is that Leader of the Opposition is free to say, we will allow guns, but we could still have strict limitations and regulations. So for example, we would require licenses to be able to carry a gun. We would have very strict background checks for anyone who wants to be able to own a gun. So if you have a criminal record, for example, we will not let you own a gun. So at Leader of the Opposition, you have to clarify, yes, you disagree with the motion, but how much? To what extent are you willing to disagree? And you have to be able to hit the middle point between you want to disagree to a significant amount so that it's debatable, so that both sides aren't fighting for the same thing and the difference in the debate is so minimal. But at the same time, you don't want to be extreme. You don't want to defend a very absolutist stance that is very difficult to defend. So for example, the opposite of a ban might be to allow absolutely everyone to hold a gun, but it doesn't mean that that's what you should defend, because I think that that's very indefensible and very difficult to win a debate on. The second thing is you have a counter proposal. And here's where I want to introduce the concept of fiat. Fiat means that you will assume the debate is going to happen. So going back to this house would ban guns, the Prime Minister will have enough power to say a ban will happen. You can't make arguments to say that the ban will not pass in Congress, people will not support the ban, and therefore there will be no ban. It just means that the ban is going to happen. However, it does not mean that the ban is going to work or that the ban is going to be a good idea, that it's going to be successful. What that entails, however, is that you have fiat as well on the opposing side, which is basically to say, for any resources that the Prime Minister uses for their proposal, you can also give a counter proposal with the same and equal amount of resources. So again, if Prime Minister bans guns and they say we'll have all these background checks, we'll send police forces to raid areas that have been known to sell guns in secret, we will criminalize any ownership of guns, you could maybe say all those resources spent on cracking down on guns, we will instead use on background checks, we will instead use on strict regulations, etc. So both sides have an equal amount of power to be able to do what they want in the debate. The next thing to do is to respond. Since Prime Minister is giving arguments, you'd want to refute those arguments, explain why they're wrong or why they're less important. The last thing is you want to provide your own arguments or substantive material for the opposition side. Deputy speakers. So note that you are now the second speaker of your team. You have more of an opportunity to respond to the other side because you've already heard the material that comes out from other speakers. And therefore, you have more of an opportunity to rebut and explain why their side is mistaken, as I mentioned. The second is you want to provide material that supports either your Prime Minister, if you're a Deputy Prime Minister, or your Leader of the Opposition, if you're Deputy Leader of the Opposition. So maybe the other side gave a fairly compelling rebuttal to your teammate's argument. What you'd want to do is explain why the argument might still work, what are other reasons as to why the argument is true, etc. Since both sides are going to be responding to each other substantially, you don't just want to prove the other side wrong, but you want to defend your side, and especially what your partner has said more. The last thing is if you have a new argument or a new idea you want to introduce into the debate, you can also do that as a deputy speaker. Member speakers. So, member speakers, as I mentioned, have to provide that extension or the new substantive material in support or in opposition, I should clarify that here, of the motion. And note here that they're the only speaker who may do so. So look at the difference here. At opening, both the Prime Minister and the Deputy Prime Minister, or the Leader of the Opposition and the Deputy Leader of the Opposition, can provide new substantive material. But in closing, only member speakers can provide new material. And so, if you have an extension, it has to clearly come out from the member speaker. And I'll explain why when we get to whip speakers. But for now, note that the extension has to come from you as member. You can also provide responses to the other side or ways to explain how your new material fits with the rest of the debate. Whip speakers. You should provide a strategic summary of your side of the debate. Now, whenever I see guides that say a whip should provide a summary, I hear a lot of whips basically just saying what everyone else has said. That is not how you should be doing a whip speech. You want to explain why your member speaker wins the debate. And so you don't just want to say, here's the debate that happened. You want to say, here's the debate that happened, here's how my partner's argument fits into the debate, and what exactly it's able to do and why it wins. And one of the ways you can do that is to also provide your own responses, your own rebuttals to the other sides. But note here is that these are only responses. You cannot provide new arguments, but you can provide new material. And I guess just to further clarify, material is very broad. Material can be any kind of thing you can provide into the debate, but you cannot provide an entirely new argument. Now, the line between material and argument is confusing, not only for beginners, but for everyone, even judges. This is a very thin line, one that is not clearly drawn out, and one that, in my opinion, many manuals still struggle to be able to draw. I guess the most intuitive rule of thumb is, are they providing a new piece of material that is fundamentally changing the direction of the, not necessarily the direction of the debate, but the direction of the extension speaker? And is this material something that cannot be logically derived from the extension speaker or other material that exists in the round? So what I mean by that is, if you are just completely introducing something new that has no connection but is still valuable maybe, but it's very difficult to connect to what everyone else is saying, and especially to what your member speaker is saying. That might be too new to be able to credit. The reason for this rule is that since whip speakers are the last speakers, if they provide a new argument, there is very limited opportunity to be able to respond to these new arguments. And so they have to be simply responsive to other speakers or defensive of their own partner rather than introducing a fundamentally new case into the debate. So, again, is this something that could possibly be logically derived from the extension speaker? Is it going through too many logical derivations? In that instance, it might be a completely new argument. So, here is the World Universities Debating Championship Manual that explains what is allowed by whips. So you can provide explanations of previously made arguments, new rebuttal, new examples, or new explanations regarding the impact or prioritization of existing lines of argumentation. Anything the other side can reasonably be expected to understand the team intended from their member speech. So that's what I'm trying to say. If the other sides can reasonably expect that this could have come out from your member, if it could be logically derived, it's allowable. However, you cannot do anything that fundamentally changes the direction of the case from the extension speech, does and gives entirely new reasons to do things, claims that new things will happen, or claims new moral truths or new maybe moral justifications as to why something should happen. So for whip speakers, you have to be very conscious of what material you're giving, because even if it's compelling, a judge may simply not believe it as a consequence of the rules, or not credit it, rather. The last thing to note are points of information. So these are formalized interjections with no more than 15 seconds. How they'll normally happen is between the 1 minute mark and 6 minute mark of a speech. In person, you'd normally raise your hand or stand up. On Zoom, you'd either type it in the chat or raise your hand on your camera as well. But you cannot say anything that is leading until the speaker calls you. So for example, if I'm still speaking and I have not said I will take a POI from this person, you cannot just butt in and say your point of information, or you cannot just type it on Zoom. You will have to wait until you are called. It is incredibly encouraged to take points of information as well, because they make the debate more engaging, and you can possibly be punished for not taking a point of information. So this is particularly helpful if you're an opening team, and in the latter part of the debate, there are closing teams who no longer can be responded to by the opening team, and so a point of information might be helpful. There are many reasons you'd want to do a point of information. Maybe you'd want to clarify something. Maybe you'd want to ask something. Maybe you'd want to bring up a point of material from your side that has not been addressed. Maybe you want to question a part of an argument of another speaker. There are no hard set limitations as to what a point of information or a POI ought be, except for the fact that it can't be more than 15 seconds. You have to wait until you are called. So that's all for BP. Hopefully the next guide is going to be easier to understand because it's 3v3, but the difficult part about it is going to be the different variations.